You know, it's wild how early it starts, this quiet training in disappearing. From the moment we open our eyes, we're told what a good girl looks like. Be kind. Be quiet. Don't ask for too much. Smile. Make others comfortable even when you're breaking inside. Somewhere between our first steps and our first heartbreak, we learn that approval is earned through self-erasure, and so we become mirrors, reflecting others' desires, shrinking ourselves to fit into what they need: a good daughter, a caring partner, an ideal woman. We offer our time, our bodies, our energy, our dreams, and we call it love. But no one teaches us what happens when you give so much that there's nothing left. No one warns you that one day you might wake up and realize you don't know who you are anymore. Not really. You only know the version of yourself others needed you to be. This is the silent crisis of so many women. Successful on the outside, but internally lost. We play our parts so well that we forget their roles. And when life finally slows down, or breaks us down, we're left staring at a hollow reflection. Who am I if I stop being everything for everyone else? Carl Jung called this a loss of connection to the self, the core of who we are beyond the masks. And when a woman loses that connection, life begins to feel dull, disconnected, heavy. Not necessarily tragic, just lifeless, like you're moving through your own story as a background character. I've seen it happen in women who had everything: a family, a career, a stable life, and yet they would sit across from me, eyes filled with a sadness they couldn't name. They weren't broken, they were buried under years of expectations, compromises, and quiet betrayals of their own desires. And here's the thing: the world rewards that kind of self-denial. The more you give, the more you're praised. The more you say yes, the more you're loved. Until one day, you start saying no, even softly, and suddenly, people pull away. Not because you've become cruel, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself for their comfort. That's when the real conflict begins. The split between who you are and who the world expects you to be. And it's terrifying. You might feel guilty, selfish, even unlovable. You'll question everything: your worth, your past choices, your right to take up space. But that's also the moment the journey back to yourself begins. It's quiet at first, a nudge, a whisper, a moment where you suddenly notice your own exhaustion, a moment where you hear your own voice beneath the noise, tired, but still there. That voice, it's sacred. It's the part of you that never forgot who you are. So let me ask you something. When was the last time you truly listened to yourself? Not through the filter of how it will affect others, but simply because your soul was speaking? Take your time with that question. It might just be the beginning of everything. There's a moment in every awakening when the ground begins to shift beneath your feet. Not because the world changes, but because you do. It starts with a strange discomfort, a restlessness, a realization that something inside you wants to surface, but you've spent your whole life trying to keep it buried. That something is the shadow. Jung described the shadow as the sum of everything we've rejected in ourselves. All the traits we were told were unacceptable, unfeminine, or dangerous. For many women, it's not darkness in the way we usually imagine. It's power, it's clarity, it's the ability to say no and mean it, to be angry, to be wild, to want. But we were taught that wanting is selfish, that strength is threatening, that a nice girl doesn't raise her voice, doesn't take up space, doesn't choose herself. And so we stuffed our rage, our fire, our hunger down deep. We became so skilled at self-silencing, we forgot what our own truth sounded like. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits, patiently, until the day we're finally too exhausted to keep pretending. That day, it doesn't arrive with fanfare. It's often quiet. You snap at someone and surprise yourself. You cry over something small but feel centuries of grief behind it. You say, "I can't do this anymore," and realize you mean it. And in that moment, the shadow steps forward, not as a villain, but as a messenger. It brings you the parts of yourself you left behind to survive. The assertiveness you traded for acceptance, the wildness you replaced with politeness, the truth you silenced to keep the peace. It's terrifying, yes, because now you're face to face with emotions you never learned to hold. You feel raw, unstable, unsure, but underneath that chaos is something sacred, a chance to become whole. You begin to see that your anger isn't a flaw. It's a boundary that was ignored too long. Your fear isn't weakness. It's your body asking for safety. Even your jealousy, your sadness, your shame. They're not monsters, they're signals, they're mirrors, they're invitations to deeper honesty. And here's the twist most people don't expect. Your shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to protect you. It wants to remind you that you were never meant to live half a life. So you begin the work, not of fixing yourself, but of reclaiming yourself. You start journaling at midnight when the mask slips. You cry in the car and don't apologize for it. You say no and sit with the discomfort. You scream into pillows and feel your voice come alive again. You take up space, bit by bit, breath by breath, and each time you do, something buried flickers back to life. You realize your shadow was never your enemy. It was your lost self waiting for you to stop running. So I'll ask you now, what part of yourself have you been afraid to meet? What truth have you been swallowing just to keep things peaceful? Whatever your answer is, that's where your power is hiding. There's a particular kind of grief that comes not from loss, but from shedding. When you begin to peel away the layers of who the world taught you to be, you don't just feel relief, you feel mourning, because even when the roles suffocate you, they're still familiar. They gave you a sense of purpose, of safety, of identity. But what happens when the good woman starts saying no? When she stops over-explaining, stops apologizing, stops sacrificing herself for the comfort of others? The world pushes back. Suddenly, the same people who praised your kindness call you cold. The ones who admired your selflessness now label you difficult. They don't realize it, but what they're reacting to isn't your cruelty, it's your clarity. They can't manipulate a woman who's learned to honor herself. This is where the old self begins to die, not violently, but slowly. A soft unraveling. You start noticing the roles you used to perform so well. The nurturer, the peacemaker, the overachiever. And for the first time, you realize you never chose them. They were assigned to you, and you carried them like sacred scripts. But now those scripts feel heavy, fake, foreign, and in their place rises a deeper question. Who am I when I stop performing? That question can feel like a void. There's no immediate answer, just space, silence, and a strange mix of terror and freedom. This is the archetypal death before rebirth, the crumbling of your false self so your true self can emerge. And it's not glamorous, it's messy. You may feel more lost than ever. You may long to go back to the safety of predictability, but something inside you won't let you. That something is your essence, your wildness, your soul. You begin to sense the forgotten goddess within, not the distant myth, but the archetype Jung spoke of, the intuitive, powerful, untamed force inside every woman, the one who doesn't live to be chosen, but to choose, who doesn't fear solitude but knows its sacredness, who doesn't ask for permission to exist. She's not here to be liked, she's here to be real. And when you begin to live from that place, everything shifts. You stop saying yes when your gut screams no. You stop dressing your silence as maturity. You stop keeping the peace at the expense of your own. But this also means letting go of the comfort of being understood, of being the easy one. You may outgrow friendships, relationships, entire identities. And that's painful, because part of you still wants to be loved for who you were, the compliant, convenient version, but deeper still, you begin to want something else entirely, to be seen for who you are. And that's where the rebirth begins, not in being perfect, but in being real. So here's a question only you can answer. Are you ready to disappoint others in order to be true to yourself? Because that's the cost of becoming whole, and also the reward. There's a moment in this journey, quiet but profound, when a woman begins to feel her body not as a thing to be fixed, displayed, or judged, but as a sacred space, a home. After years, sometimes decades of treating it like a battlefield of expectations and silent comparisons, she finally pauses and listens. For so long, the body had been a site of war. Diets, discomfort, punishment, disguised as discipline. Movement became obligation. Pleasure was a guilty indulgence. Rest felt like laziness. And beneath it all was the same belief: my body is not enough. But as she begins to reclaim her truth, something in her body stirs awake. At first, it's just awareness. The tightness in her chest when she's around certain people, the clenching in her stomach when she says yes but wants to say no. These weren't just emotional reactions. They were messages. Her body had been speaking all along. She just hadn't known how to hear it. Jung often emphasized the deep connection between psyche and soma, that the body carries the weight of our unconscious wounds. Trauma doesn't just live in the mind. It burrows into flesh, into muscle memory, into posture and breath. And for many women, the body becomes the container of generations of silenced pain. But now the silence breaks. She begins to move, not to shrink, but to feel. She stretches with reverence. She walks slower. She inhales deeply. She dances when no one is watching, not for attention, but to remember what freedom feels like. Her body becomes not an image to be consumed, but an instrument of intuition, creativity, and presence. She starts to recognize the sacredness in rest, in cycles, in softness. The very things she was once told made her weak now feel like sources of power. She no longer forces herself to hustle when her body asks for stillness. She no longer sees exhaustion as a badge of honor. She gives herself permission to receive. This isn't vanity, this is reconnection, healing, a radical act of self-respect. And with that comes a deeper shift, a sense of embodiment. She's no longer hovering above her life, watching herself perform. She's in it, grounded, alive, whole. Her sensuality returns, not necessarily in the sexual sense, but in the sensory one. The feel of warm fabric, the scent of morning coffee, the sound of her own laughter. She starts to exist in her life, not just function through it. And maybe, for the first time, she touches her own skin with tenderness. She looks in the mirror and doesn't immediately critique. She sees the story, the resilience, the woman behind the eyes. Because now the body is no longer something to conquer. It's something to honor. It holds the wisdom of every lesson, every boundary, every breakthrough. So let me ask you, what would change if you treated your body not as a project, but as a sacred ally? Maybe everything. Maybe this is where coming home truly begins. There comes a time, often after the noise dies down, after the roles are released and the old masks fall, when a woman finds herself sitting in the silence she once feared. No more pretending, no more proving, just her. And for a moment it feels like nothing and everything, all at once. This is the space between identities, the sacred in-between where loneliness used to live. But something has changed. The emptiness she once dreaded now feels strangely peaceful, not because she's finally figured everything out, but because she's stopped running from herself. For most of her life, she was taught that her value lived in being needed. that to be alone meant to be unlovable, unwanted, unworthy. So she poured herself into relationships, roles, distractions, anything to avoid the echo of her own unmet self. But now, stripped of those illusions, she meets herself, raw, real, and incredibly human. And what she discovers is unexpected. She's not a stranger. She begins to notice the beauty in solitude, mornings that are hers alone, thoughts uninterrupted by others' opinions, decisions made not out of fear, but desire. In this solitude, her intuition grows louder, her creativity deeper, her peace more steady. She becomes her own sanctuary. It's not that she doesn't still crave connection. She does. But now it's from a place of fullness, not hunger. She no longer begs for scraps of affection or bends to fit into other people's lives. She no longer confuses attention with love or presence with purpose. Instead, she cultivates a relationship with herself that's rooted in honesty, care, and trust. She speaks to herself with gentleness. She celebrates her own small victories. She keeps promises to herself, even the quiet ones. And this inner loyalty becomes her foundation. The fear of being alone softens, because now she sees being with herself isn't a punishment, it's a privilege. And it's from this rootedness that new connections emerge, not relationships built on filling a void, but on sharing a truth. People begin to show up who don't need her to shrink or dim or perform. They're drawn to her grounded presence, not because she seeks approval, but because she radiates wholeness. This is the paradox. The more deeply she connects with herself, the less alone she feels, even in solitude, because now she carries home within her. Wherever she goes, she belongs. So here's a question that changed everything for me once. What if the love you've been looking for in others has always been waiting for you in yourself? And what if, just maybe, you were never really alone at all? As she grows into her truth, something unexpected begins to happen. The world starts to push back, not with violence, but with subtle resistance. Side comments, raised eyebrows, the quiet distance of those who once praised her selflessness and now whisper, "You've changed." And she has. Because what they really mean is, you're no longer convenient. This part of the journey demands a brutal kind of honesty, not just with others, but with herself. It's one thing to find your voice. It's another to keep using it when it costs you comfort, approval, belonging, love. This is the chapter of sacred grief, the one where she learns that not everyone is meant to walk with her into this new version of herself. Some connections were built on her silence, her flexibility, her willingness to bend so others didn't have to. But now she stands taller, speaks clearer, and not everyone can meet her there. There's a heartbreak in this, a soft, aching goodbye to old dynamics, to people she once loved, to versions of herself that kept the peace at all costs. She realizes that in order to be fully true to herself, she has to release what no longer aligns. Even if it once felt like home, this isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Jung once said that individuation requires the death of the false self, the persona we wear to survive in a world that rewards conformity. And when she lets go of that mask, she no longer fits where she used to. She no longer says yes when her soul screams no, and she no longer tries to explain her choices to people committed to misunderstanding her. It hurts. God, it hurts. Because she wanted to bring everyone with her. She wanted to evolve and still be loved exactly the same. But growth doesn't work like that. Expansion exposes what was conditional. And sometimes love must be grieved too. But in this shedding, something else emerges. Integrity. She begins to feel the relief of living aligned, The ease of no longer splitting herself into palatable pieces, the pride of standing by her values even when her voice shakes. And slowly, the space left by the lost connections begins to fill, not with noise, but with truth. New relationships form, forged in mutual respect. Conversations deepen, laughter feels real. She starts to experience what it's like to be fully seen and still chosen. It's not about having no fear, it's about loving yourself enough to walk forward anyway, even if you walk alone for a while. So let me ask you, what are you still holding on to because you're afraid of who might leave if you let go? Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is disappoint others, to finally stop disappointing yourself. It doesn't happen all at once. This feeling of arriving, there's no single moment of triumph, no applause, no grand revelation. But one day, almost without noticing, she realizes she's no longer fighting to prove her worth. She simply lives it. The woman she has become no longer seeks validation, not because she's closed off, but because she's finally rooted. Her joy is quiet, her strength unshakable. There's a lightness in her step, not from a perfect life, but from carrying herself with care and truth. This is what wholeness feels like, not the absence of flaws or fears, but the full embrace of them. She no longer sees her tenderness as weakness. Her depth doesn't embarrass her. Her boundaries don't come with apologies. She is complex and contradictory, and she no longer tries to make herself simpler for anyone's comfort. And now the world meets her differently, not because the world has changed, but because she has. She doesn't attract what drains her anymore. She no longer entertains what dishonors her. She doesn't pretend to be less wise, less intense, less radiant. She doesn't fear taking up space. She just is. This is the freedom that comes not from rebellion, but from integration. She has made peace with her past. She no longer clings to old wounds like proof of her suffering. They've become part of her story, but no longer her identity. Her future doesn't frighten her because she trusts herself now to handle whatever comes. And perhaps most beautifully, she no longer asks permission to feel joy. She lets herself dance without a reason. She enjoys beauty, not to impress, but to savor. She rests, not because she's earned it, but because she deserves it. Her life becomes art, not because it's curated, but because it's true. Jung called this state individuation, becoming who you truly are beyond the masks, the roles, the shadows. And in her, it lives as a quiet revolution. She speaks less, but says more. She does less, but feels deeper. She moves through the world, not with urgency, but with presence. And maybe the most miraculous part, she becomes a mirror. Her authenticity gives others permission to drop their own masks. Her peace invites others to find theirs, without preaching, without convincing. Simply by being, she inspires. So if you're still in the beginning of your own becoming, still breaking, still shedding, still trembling, remember this. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you were before the world told you who to be. And that woman, she's already inside you, waiting to be lived.